As the Chinese proverb or curse goes, may you live in interesting times, and it always seems to be something interesting happening here in Israel. Hi, I'm Daniel Seaman. You're watching Straight Up on JNS Studios here in Jerusalem, Israel. So what's happening right now? Well, very dramatic events, as Trump and Netanyahu promised us just last week. What we know as of now is the following. The meetings in Sharm el-Sheikh that began last week have brought about an agreement on the first phase of Trump's proposal. Hamas will release by this Sunday the 20 living Israeli hostages, all in one stage. Hamas will also release the bodies of the 28 murdered hostages by Monday. An additional 400 tons of food will be entering Gaza daily from 7 different locations now, including through the border with Egypt and Rafah. A ceasefire will prevail. Hamas will lay down and surrender its weapons. Once this is done, Israel withdraws from the areas in Gaza to the predetermined perimeter, not withdrawing completely, but to an area outside of where it is holding at the moment. Israel will release, once these things happen, 2,000 terrorists. Their names have yet to be determined. Afterwards begins the talks on how to fulfill the other elements of the proposal. The total dismantling of Hamas and its military abilities. Who will control the area? How will the reconstruction of Gaza take place? How Gazans who choose to can leave, and where will they go to? These questions are still to be addressed. Also, the question of Palestinian self-rule and the future of a possible state is also to be negotiated. There are conditions on every one of these things that have to be met that Israel has already accepted. Now, we know that Trump is also coming to Israel to speak before the Knesset sometimes next week. I assume that he will also be taken to see the areas around the Gaza Strip, the Jewish communities, the Israeli communities that were attacked 2 years ago on October 7th. It is important to stress here that Israel has made it absolutely clear that Hamas will be completely disarmed, and its leaders are to leave the Gaza Strip. The leading terrorists and those involved in the October 7th atrocities will not be released. The PA, the Palestinian Authority, under present conditions, will not be involved in Gaza. And there will not be a Palestinian state in any way in consideration at the moment until they meet those criteria that the United States put forth in the Trump proposal. Meanwhile, in the background, the terrorism continues. Hamas terrorists are still trying to kill Israelis. 9 of them last night, in an attempt to kidnap Israeli soldiers in Gaza, attacked an Israeli position. All of them were killed. And also last night in Judea and Samaria, Hamas functions were also trying to attack Israeli soldiers there. So these things are still happening. The Arab nations, who last week spoke about creating a NATO-type Muslim force, that has withered away. The EU have suddenly decided to freeze the efforts that they were planning to boycott Israel. And the West facing existential internal crises, it only shows that the speeches they gave in New York just a month ago were just political theater, more than acts of substance. It is the diplomatic equivalent of wearing a keffiyeh, meaningless virtue signaling. And suddenly no one is talking anymore about the hunger and genocide in Gaza. It is very symbolic that the release of our hostages will occur on the eve of Simchat Torah, the Hebrew calendar date of the beginning of the war 2 years ago. And this will potentially bring an end to the war after 2 years. Israel has paid a very heavy price in the war that commenced over 2 years ago. More than 900 men and women of our armed forces were killed in action. This is our greatest generation, who through their conviction, determination, and sacrifice allowed us to reach the point that we are at today. This is a major achievement in and of itself for Israel. Because for years, in government, we were told that we cannot conduct a long-term war, that we can only go on for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month. First off, our military is incapable of conducting such a long-term war, certainly over months. We've been at it for 2 years now. We were told that the Israeli public, although in every one of the rounds that commenced in Gaza, since the withdrawal from the Gaza Strip in 2005, there were 19 rounds. Every time the citizens in the south of Israel made it very clear to the government that they want the government to end this thing. They're no longer willing to be under terrorist threat and missile fire. But every time Israel felt that it couldn't because there'll be international pressure, because the military cannot proceed with such a long-term war. Well, this generation proved that the military can. The population in Israel stood behind their statements before, telling the government that we can withhold and withstand such a long-term war. And the international pressure? So there's international pressure. I've said it before on my shows, that we'd much rather be despised by the world than have them mourning our children. This happened on October 7th. It will never happen again as far as we can control it. The agreement is the peak, at least for now, of tectonic shifts that have been taking place over the past year. The systematic dismantling of the Iranian ring that was meant to destroy Israel. Sinwar, Nasrallah, Hezbollah, Syria, and the Iranian nuclear abilities, they were all taken out over the past year. No one thought this was possible before. All this was done with the exceptional abilities and unprecedented military and intelligence capabilities of the State of Israel. This culminated with the attempt at taking out the Hamas leaders who were taking refuge in Qatar. The good news of all of this is, well, first and foremost, the hostages, all of them, are supposed to be coming home in the beginning of next week. No one thought this was possible even as far as 1 month ago. That is monumental. It is a moment of relief for us, of hope, of long-awaited justice for all Israelis. We were all waiting for them. We also were retained and reserved in our attempt to destroy Hamas because we knew that they held our hostages. The bad news, well, we don't know about the rest. We don't know what Hamas will do next. We don't know if this agreement will hold. And if history is any guide, we have every reason to be skeptical. Because we in Israel, we've been here before. We've seen this happen so often before. Dozens of agreements, ceasefires, diplomatic arrangements, whether with Hamas, the Palestinians, the broader Muslim nations, not one of them ever, not a single one of them, were ever honored fully. Go back as 1949, the Rhodes Armistice agreements after the War of Independence, violated by the Arabs. The 1957 Sinai withdrawal, we withdrew totally from the Sinai after a UN promise that they will protect the borders of Israel. 10 years later, we were involved in the Six-Day War, and the UN withdrew from the Sinai under Egyptian pressure. The Camp David Accords that were signed for peace with Egypt, Egypt violated. One of the aspects of this agreement is, something that Netanyahu demanded, is that Egypt withdraw those forces that moved into the Sinai in recent years. The UN Resolution 1701, that over 10 years ago, that determined that Hezbollah would not be in areas along the border with Israel, broken. The UN did nothing about it. Every one of our agreements, every one of the things that Israel fulfilled were violated by our enemies. So let's say for the sake of argument that this time it is different, that Hamas keeps its word, that the Arabs make sure that Hamas keeps its word, that the hostages do come home, that disarmament of Hamas begins, and that the peace plan moves forward. Then what? What happens after, say, Trump leaves office in 3 years? Who verifies that the Arabs continue upholding their part of this agreement and it's not all part of the Islamic game of taqiyya? Because, make no mistake, this agreement, this moment, this fragile hope, it's built on Trump's presence, his leverage, his unpredictability, his willingness to redraw the map and call out the double game that the Arabs are playing. But what happens when he's no longer in the room? When the next administration takes over, it can happen within 3 years. Possibly an administration with a different worldview, a different set of priorities, a different tolerance rate for risk. Will the plan survive? Will the pressure hold? Or will we slide back into the same cycle of appeasement, denial, and diplomatic theater? This isn't just about today. It's also about tomorrow and the future, about whether the world is ready to confront the reality of political Islam, the duplicity of its leaderships, and the cost of pretending that peace can be built on illusions. As for Netanyahu, if his critics are right, and he truly thinks only about himself, then he, I'm sure, understands this one thing. This war is his legacy. The October 7th is etched in the timeline of his leadership, an event that history won't ignore. But what followed after October 7th and in the last 2 years is something entirely different. The transformation of Israel into a regional powerhouse, a nation that does not just defend its borders, but reshapes global dynamics. That's the legacy he's crafting right now. It's not just about Israel's survival anymore. It's about our influence, about rewriting the rules. And part of that legacy is his refusal to accept old certainties. The idea, for example, that Hezbollah will always be a threat in Lebanon or in Syria, that Israel must always play defense. Those assumptions are being shattered right now. It started with the attack in Qatar. Netanyahu's doctrine is one of disruption, of redefining what Israel is capable and possible of doing. Whether you admire him or not, this shift is undeniable. Israel isn't just one that's reacting, it's leading, and the world is watching, as we see, with their standing in line for this agreement. What brought us here was moving into the Gaza Strip, despite the fact that just a year ago we were told you can't move into Rafah, you can't go into the other areas there. We were told just a few months ago we can't move into Gaza City, but Israel did that. And also, when we took out or attempted to take out the leadership of Hamas in Qatar, we still don't know who of them has been removed or not. But even that, when we were told, oh, this is disrupting the sovereignty of Qatar, this made a huge shift in the attitudes of the Arabs. An Israeli friend of mine from Ashkelon, Moshe Jan, shared a post this week on social media, making some important and interesting observations of how what is happening here applies to the international community as well. He said, on October 7th, 2025, it was not only a date that will forever mark a turning point in the history of Israel and the Jewish people. It wasn't just a day of terror. It was a day that exposed the fault lines of global ideology, media bias, and the fragility of Western complacency. Yahya Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas, in his brutal calculus, he didn't just devastate Gaza. He didn't just shatter the lives and the communities of his own people. He detonated the illusion that political Islam could coexist quietly within a global order. His actions triggered the collapse of the chokehold around Israel and, more profoundly, the unraveling of the Muslim Brotherhood's ideological grip across the Middle East and beyond. Hezbollah, fragmenting under pressure. Hamas, militarily and morally bankrupt. Iran, bleeding internally, struggling to provide water, electricity, the basic dignity to its own citizens. Assad, no longer in Syria. He's poisoned, isolated, clinging to power through foreign lifelines. But here's the twist. Sinwar didn't anticipate. The silent majority around the world began to stir. Not the politicians, not the pundits, ordinary citizens. People who had never paid attention to the Middle East suddenly found themselves staring at grotesque images, vulgar protests, and a media narrative that was so skewed it felt like gaslighting. And they didn't just feel outrage. The public in the world felt the disgust that many of us in Israel feel. And Moshe Jan continues in his post. In places like the United States, citizens woke up to a new reality. Their countries were being reshaped by waves of immigration, not rooted in integration, but in imposition. Cultures that reject liberal values, that glorify violence, that seek not to join, but to replace. And the result, he writes, a surge of national identity, a collapse in tolerance for ideological violence, a demand for governments to rethink immigration, foreign aid, and the very assumptions that have guided Western policy for decades. Political Islam's masks, the quiet hijra and the taqiyya, that has been ripped off. What's left is the raw face of an ideology that seeks domination, not dialogue. And now the world is entering a new era, one of clarity, of boundaries, of public resolve not to retreat into the illusions of the past. For Israel, the mission is very clear after this war. Keep exposing the double game of political Islam. Show the world that this isn't just our fight, it's the world's fight as well. Because the threat isn't regional, it's global. Moshe Jan, my friend, writes about Sinwar. He says that Sinwar is not just the architect of Gaza's ruin. He's the man who triggered this global awakening, the collapse of the ideological chokehold, the disaster of 2023, and the reckoning that's now sweeping across continents. So as you can see clearly from what he says, this is not only an Israeli event. It's an event that affects all of us, and that's what has been clear to us in Israel since the beginning 2 years ago. So what's next? What now? Well, obviously making sure that the agreement continues and that they, Hamas, and the Arab nations are held to their commitments. And this by the same world who know how very quickly to make demands on Israel. As for Israel, we can expect, now that hopefully once the hostages are released, there'll be talk about going to elections. But before the elections, we will now have the opportunity to finally mourn our dead, not only the dead hostages that will be returned, but also, as I mentioned before, the over 900 Israeli soldiers, the families who've been devastated. We can really now, because we know perhaps the war is over, that we have the time to think about all the losses, appreciate what we have been given here, appreciate the life that we have in Israel, and mourn those soldiers who have fallen in battle. And then we'll move on, probably in debates as we always have here. It seems to be very common in Israeli society to continue arguing, and certainly if we go into elections, but we're also going to have to address and finally investigate something that many of us, like myself, didn't think was necessary as long as the war was going on, because we had to keep ourselves focused on this war and how do we defeat our enemy. So after we've concluded this, it is very important to investigate, how did we even get here? How did all that happened on October 7th happen? How did the IDF fail? How did the state of Israel fail in its most important objective, the protection of the Israeli Jewish people in their ancient homeland, the land of Israel? This country failed at its most important role and task, and this has to be addressed, whether or not it was by complacency or by cooperation of some individuals, by hoping that this will topple a duly democratically elected government in Israel. These are questions that still need to be addressed. These are things you're going to see. But before that, we have next week to rejoice, to be grateful, to see the families finally embracing their sons that we were not sure they'd get home alive. Also, express our sympathy for those who've known for a long time that their loved ones are not alive, and yet they have the bodies to be buried. We have to stand guard to make sure that our government does not quiver, does not allow international pressure, because it's always easy to put pressure on Israel. It's always easy to tell the Jews, well, make a little more concessions. No more concessions. And this is very clear to our government. You're not going to see Netanyahu being opposed. You're not going to, the international media will try to tell you and explain to you that that's what's happening. No, he is doing what the Israeli public want him to do. And we want Hamas to be held, and the Arab countries to be held to their commitments. Meaning, and what we want, is that Hamas no longer poses a threat to the Israeli civilians throughout Israel, not only in the south of Israel. And that the Arab countries understand that they have to live with us. They may not like it. Believe me, we don't like living with them either. But we live with them. We don't pose a threat to them. But we sure as hell from now on will make it very uncomfortable for them if they continue trying to destroy the state of Israel. That is, for us, the lessons of 2 years ago. The Israeli people came out of this more determined, more focused on what needs to be done for the protection of our children in the future. And if the world doesn't like it, well, you have bigger problems that you have to address. Thank you for being with us today. I hope that the most optimistic of our views for next week do come around and we do embrace our hostages. Have a happy holiday. Simchat Torah coming up this year will be one of gratitude. Thank you very much. I'm Daniel Seaman. You are watching Straight Up on JNS TV.